Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Great to have you. Today we're talking about Kirikaeshi. It's the drill that keeps on giving in Kendo. We practice it an awful lot. And I'm sure at some point some people have probably wondered why we practice it so much and why it's cracked up to be this all-encompassing drill. And we're going to get right into that today. We're going to talk about 6 different variations that you can practice, that I practice in my dojo and I've come across over the years, the different kind of aims and purposes behind each of the different styles of Kirikaeshi, because Kirikaeshi is highly malleable. It's very modifiable by the sensei. They can purpose it in different ways to shift the focus of your Kihon practice. Okay, so there's a lot of great things to take away from Kirikaeshi, and if it's done to a very full level of practice where you're concentrating on the elements at hand, then it will continue to reward you for the entirety of your Kendo journey. So without any further ado, we're going to get stuck into the 6 different variations that we generally practice in the dojo, and I'll explain some of the reasoning behind each methodology and what we're focusing on. Stick around to the end though, because we're going to do a summary of key points that you should try to keep in mind for every practice of Kirikaeshi. So these would apply to any modification or variation that we do, but these are just fundamental key points that you should always try to do no matter the situation, and it can be incredibly hard. Kirikaeshi is one of those drills that the better you get at it, the harder it becomes. Okay, so the very first variation is basically what we call as our standard Kihon Kirikaeshi. This is very much for, it can be done for beginners. This particular variation is for beginners. It's quite good for beginners who don't have Borgu as well. And you'll see some teachers will practice this, some federations might even have this in their grading syllabus. Generally speaking though, when I've talked to Japanese high grades, this version is discouraged beyond beginner level. Okay, now just for the sake of clarity, don't focus so much on the speed. Okay, so in the outset, especially I would say up to Shodan in particular, maybe even this goes for kind of Nidan level as well to some degree, although maybe a little less so. You shouldn't be aiming to do your Kirikaeshi particularly fast, okay? So this is kind of a controlled pace where we're really focusing on Kikkentai no Ichi. Now the most basic difference between this is that starting from Toma, which is the too far distance, right, where there's a gap between the shinai, you seme in and nice big beautiful men cut, and then close the distance, and there's a kind of touching of the hands. Okay, now this is the part that the Japanese high grades, and I'm talking about like delegation visitors as well, this is not in the book. Basically this is not officially in Kirikaeshi, but it can be useful for beginners, and here's why. Often when you're coaching beginners, you'll find that they'll strike that big men and then they'll stop on the spot. So they'll go, yeah, men, and they may even step back slightly because they're not really sure of the pattern of Kirikaeshi. So obviously the Kirikaeshi is the one big step in, cut men, close the distance, basically continue forward, and then it's 4 yoko men starting on the right hand side going forward and 5 going back, and then come back to Toma again, step into Isoku Taramai, make another men cut, do the whole sequence again, 4 yoko men forward, 5 yoko men going backwards. Okay, come back to Toma, seme, large men, and go through, and that's the standard form of Kirikaeshi. But like I said, this touching of the kote or the hands, this is not in the book. Okay, we use this for as short a time as we can get away with. The reason is I don't want my beginners to cut and stop on the spot. And I don't want them to cut, stop on the spot, and then hesitate and go back. But I cannot have them rush in recklessly against the motodachi who's wearing the men, because I've seen this kind of accident happen in the dojo before, where somebody recklessly rushes in and they clash with the motodachi, crash into them like a Tai-atari, but obviously not a coordinated Tai-atari, and they've hit their face on the main gun and got an injury that way. But most beginners don't do this. This is kind of out of the norm. Mostly what they do is they cut and then they stop and they kind of wait to get an instruction. So you want to coach this good habit of them cutting men and continuing forward. That's the important thing. And so sometimes it's just a hand gesture to invite them in. But really what you should do is you shouldn't really, for me the ideal is don't necessarily wait for them to touch. But as they're about to touch, you should then start your 3 steps back and open your, show the target for receiving the yokomen to your left as motodachi. So it's basically draw them in, and as they're about to make contact or as they touch, you should be initiating your 3 steps. You really want to train beginners to keep a good eye on their distance and make sure that they're cutting to target nicely through the whole drill, and quite big steps, big kendo, big kendo, big kendo. Okay, so this is the very first variation. I'll play it back and then I'll summarize the points. Okay, so that very first variation, as I said, there's this touch in it. Don't dwell on that too long. Eventually what you want to do is you want to remove that touch altogether. So when those people are in armor, or when they're accustomed, when they're confident and accustomed, whichever happens first, to the flow of Kirikaeshi, you really need to remove this touching of the hands. So instead, as soon as the men hits, initiate the 3 steps back and open the target so that they can go after you. Okay, but it is a variation you will see practice in some dojo, and like I said, I have seen it in some grading syllabus in some territories. So it's good to be aware that it exists, and I think that's probably the reason behind why it exists. But it is not the official All Japan Kendo Federation way of doing things. What you should be doing is, as soon as that first men strike hits, you should be creating the distance for the force yoko men and showing that target. And the kakarite should be continuing on fluidly. Okay, so we're going to come back to that concept a little bit later in one of the next variations. The second variation I'm going to show you here, we're going to vary the targets a little bit. So instead of it just being men kirikaeshi, it's going to be do kirikaeshi. And so this works by stepping in from toma. Always start from the long distance. Toma. Seme into isoku itenamai. Kata men. Close the distance, and motodachi is immediately on the move and opens the door. Now it's important motodachi doesn't make the distance for yoko men, they make the distance for door, so it's a little closer in this drill. Cut 4 door, going forwards starting on the right hand side, and 5 going back. Exactly the same pattern, but you're switching out the yoko men for door cuts. Okay. Again, try to get big lifts of the hands. Okay, but try to keep it fluid. Keep them on the move. Keep it fluid, and this is really good for wrist work, but also training people to kind of cut more with their body, with the muscles in their back, and like really open up the body by getting that lift. So good, still good for the wrist work, just like any Kirikaeshi is, and the finger work. But at the same time, they've got to cover a larger distance because it's a bigger lift up and down to make the door cut. And because the distance is a little bit different, so they're banking good memories of different types of distance layout. Okay, So very simple variation. Like I said, just switch the door cuts out, switch the yokomen cuts out, insert door cuts. But otherwise, it runs just like normal Kirikaeshi. Okay, so the next variation is basically a hybrid version of the first two. So when we do this in the dojo, we just say it's mixed Kirikaeshi, okay? And basically the pattern is step in from Toma, Isokui to the Mai, make Seme, cut the big man, and straight away it's Yokomen, Yokomen, Do, Do, Yokomen, Yokomen, Do, Do, Man, or Yokomen, okay? So 2 yokomen, 2 door going forward, 2 yokomen, 2 door, 1 yokomen going back. That makes the 5 cuts. Come to Toma, Isokui Tanamai, men, and then do the same again, and then finish with your big men going through. Okay? So now you're alternating between going up and down. There's a subtle difference again then in the control of distance for motodachi. So motodachi's got to be quite switched on for this because they're blocking here, so they're going block, block, hands up, block, block, hands up, block. Chudan, invite. Block, block, hands up, block, block, hands up, block. Chudan, invite, pump, and through. Okay, but you've got to read the distance. So this really, I think, is quite beneficial in that, again, even more wrist work. It also gets people used to cutting combinations at different levels, going up and down, and going on both sides, okay? In a very basic sense, but it does do that, and that's quite handy. There's certain body mechanics that come into controlling that, so it just fine-tunes a lot of those motor skills and coordination. But the other thing it does is it draws out, so a lot of people when they cut door, because door mostly happens at a closer distance, but it's good to learn to cut door going forward, driving forward, just like you do with your other waza. You're going to need that later in your kendo. If you're a beginner, you're going to need to learn to cut door with a very forward attitude to it, rather than a sideways attitude. And this kind of drill, you don't get to do it as often as standard Kirikaeshi, but if you have it somewhere in your repertoire with some regularity, I think later on when it comes to developing a strong Nukido or Kaishido, then this will be beneficial because you'll be very adept at throwing your hands forward into the door rather than to the sides, because you won't have a choice in this drill because motodachi is not hanging about. They're getting a move on. Yeah, they're not going to make the door so long that you can't hit it with good posture, but they also have to be able to make the yokomen distance. So they're kind of just hovering between those two distances, and there is a significant distance differential between receiving men and receiving door, and it's unreasonable to assume that they're going to hit that exactly between one type of strike and the other. So it's kind of floating and ebbing and flowing between the two when the motodachi is skilled. And that's another point. As motodachi, you should really aim to develop your skills to receive a good kirikaeshi. You want to draw the person's kendo out to where they do their best kendo. So don't zoom off down a dojo so fast that they'll never catch you, especially like if they have to break their posture to do so. It's not a race, it's not a competition. You're not going to get any ippon doing that, so there's no point in doing that. But at the same time, don't baby them, don't mollycoddle them, right? Judge what they're capable of and try to dangle the cherry just that little 5% beyond what they're doing, and see how they respond, you know. And if they really rise to that, then you can maybe push them a little harder than that. But don't overdo it. You know, like I said, it's not a competition. Okay, so just a couple of things just to keep an eye on whenever you're doing the door variation and then the mixed variation is just watch that the hands are not cutting too much in front of the face. I probably haven't set the best example in this video. You do need to be fluid with Kirikaeshi. Ultimately, you do need to be fluid, but you don't have to be especially fast. One thing I would also say in all of these variations that applies is have the attitude that you don't cut and then bounce, cut and then bounce, cut and then bounce. It should be cut, and the cut kind of stays with motodachi as long as possible. The feet move first and then the next cut. Feet, then the next cut. Feet, then the next cut. Okay? Now when you're kind of getting a move on and you're trying to be fluid, this becomes quite hard to see. But you've got to try to keep it in your mind, the Kikentai no Ichi, yeah, which is advance, cut, advance, cut, advance, cut. And the cuts should be done ichi byoshi. So not 1, 2. It should be step 1. Yeah, step 1 in a single moment. And therein lies the challenge of a large portion of the cutting of Kirikaeshi, because it's in trying to keep this fluid timing of one, sharp Kikentai no Ichi, cutting with Sutosae, the snap. Trying to do that often results in the hands being lower than you think they are. Even if you can see clearly, when you see it from the side, I've purposely filmed this from probably the least flattering angle possible. So it's going to show all my mistakes and all my faults here. But I don't really mind because it's a learning experience for me. So just because I make the mistake, don't necessarily copy my mistake. Try to do it the best you can. That's really the name of the game. But there's a tendency for the hands to come down really low. It's less of a problem with the door. So just some context is, if you speak to a lot of high grades, when they talk about cutting kote and cutting door, they usually say as long as you can see under your arms and see the targets clearly and things like that. But don't get complacent. Okay, so I'm caveating that with don't get complacent. But with men, really, you should really be trying to open your body as much as you can, and it's hard, and it looks much less forgiving when the kote is on, because the kote like extends beyond your forearm, you know. So from the side, you know, you might think your hand's up here, but your cortes are still like obscuring some of your left eye view and things like that. So try to keep an eye on these kind of habits that can emerge in the pursuit of being fluid and, dare I say, fast. Which brings us to the next couple of variations. Now, this next one is not especially fast, but when you and your motodachi have a good understanding together, good connection, yeah, it can get a bit feisty, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you need to push on, okay? Now this example that we filmed, I think we've gone at a reasonable tempo. We've just gone for aiming to be fluid and try to do it as correctly as we can. So try to do this with all the basics of the Kirikaeshi in mind. But this time you're both going to do the Kirikaeshi together, okay? So this is Iki-kiri-kaeshi. So like Aikido, right? So Aiki, the mutual connection, mutual interaction, okay? So basically there's a much more spirit of cooperation here. You're working as a team together, right? Even more so than before. Before, motodachi is really facilitating you, but now motodachi is actively practicing together with you. That's a better way to think of this. Okay, which I should be doing anyway in Kirikaeshi. You shouldn't just be just a crash test dummy, if that makes sense. But basically the long and short is, same thing, Toma, Isoku Itermai, big man, motodachi immediately comes back, and then it's together. Man, 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 Toma, Isoku, men. Oh, one side, men. Men, 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 man, Isoku, men, and through, okay? So, now there's different spins on this, so we've done it. So sometimes you can have the last one where this side cuts the men and then this side immediately turns and they cut men and go through as well. So they get a more complete run of the Kirikaeshi. We didn't do that on this occasion, just the person who was initiating the kakarite roll did the final men going through on this occasion, but you can have the different variation like that. It's also worth noting that all of these variations can be done full length of the dojo. You can modify how many times, so it doesn't have to just be men, do the yoko men, come back, men, do the yoko men, come back, men and through. I mean, you can make that so it's like you go until sensei says, and then when sensei hits a drum or something, then you do your last men going through, that kind of thing. Or you can have it so that it's full length. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to vary it up. Just if you're in a coaching position, just remember who your audience is. If you've got a room full of beginners, your time is probably not best place having them do 30 minutes of like oikomi style kirikaeshi just up and down full length of the dojo, because doing just a whole hell of a lot of bad kirikaeshi could be really detrimental. But maybe just doing 3 runs of really good solid basic kirikaeshi could pay dividends by comparison. But if you've got a dojo that's like maybe really heavy in kind of Nidan Sandan level, or maybe it's a specific night where you've got that sort of crowd in, even up to Yondan or higher, frankly. So if the practice demands it, it's a bit of a higher level practice, it's all Dan levels. Maybe you're coming close to the Taikai or something like that. So there's a real focus on conditioning. Then you might shift into these sorts of variations a bit more, and you'll maybe push the boat out in terms of volume and intensity. So just bear those things in mind. One important thing to note with the kind of Aiki style Kirikaeshi, you should both still aim for the men. It's a mistake to aim for the shinai. There's no need to aim for the shinai. The angles will sort themselves out. If you're both aiming for men, the shinai will naturally meet in the center, okay? So just bear that in mind. The usual stuff with Kirikaeshi applies. Aim for the men, okay? This is what we just call it Zanshin Kirikaeshi, and the reason why we call it that, I didn't call it that, somebody else called it that, but that's our dojo custom. We say call it up Zanshin Kirikaeshi. The point of this is to be switched on, right? Everyone has got to be switched on. So this is like basically a shift in attitude. Now there is a license to get on with it and be. The emphasis is on fluidity, and the emphasis is most definitely on applying pressure. And then for Motodachi, you've got to have Zanshin. You've got to pay attention to what's going on. You've got to be really mobile, really responsive, and light and fast on your feet. When you get this flowing right, Motodachi is almost running back and forth around the dojo. That's how fast you need to do your ayumiashi, your crossing over footwork that you do when you receive. You need to be like, as soon as that, you need to anticipate that man hitting, and oof, don't wait, but like anticipate as it hits, and you're already off, and you're basically running backwards, right? Again, you need to judge your kakarite and how far along they are. Obviously, don't zoom off without them. But the better they get, the more switched on you're going to have to get. So there's a lot of Aiki and connection involved in this, but much more intensity, okay? So the emphasis is on fluid and pressure from kakarite's side. Yeah, so it's going to be faster. Watch out though, because when you're doing this variation, this is the worst one for like your hands dropping, for doing the tsugiyashi, for making all the mistakes, right? All of your bad habits are going to be magnified when you do this one. So just bear that in mind, but you don't have time to think. At some point in Kendo has this in a lot of its practice, where there's, say for example, you do your suburi. Suburi is no pressure at all yeah, from anybody else, other than yourself focusing on doing the correct posture, correct cutting angle, the good tenuchi, the basics, cutting through the center, left hand lower than right hand, all these kinds of things. Then later on in the keiko, you do the waza practice. Now there's a bit of connection from your Motodachi, but they're still being very agreeable and showing you openings and being very accommodating. Then there's the Uchikomi Keiko. Now they expect you to make the seme, but they're still being pretty compliant. But there's there's a bit of like, all right, let's get on with it kind of thing. We're not really stopping to talk about it or anything like that. Then there's the Kakari Keiko. The Kakari Keiko is like, now it's like maximum pressure that you must try to put on the Motodachi. They're not hitting you back, but they're not doing you any favors. Well, they may hit you back, they may do some Ojiwaza practice against you, or they might stop your attack and then you get a chance for the Hikiwaza, that kind of thing. But they're not like trying to beat you. They're just practicing along with you, but they're not doing you any favors, but they're also not inhibiting you. That's kind of what high intensity practice, but kind of medium pressure from the other side. Then there's a Jikeiko, and this is still, so again, more pressure from the other side, because now they really want to practice their waza, their full repertoire of waza. But depending on the level, it depends on how competitive they might be with you, right? If it's a sensei, they're not competing with you at all, but the keiko is really hard technically because you have to get everything correct. With the peer-to-peer, then it might be a bit competitive. So it's like, well, it's pretty intense. It's not that far from the shiai. Maybe you get a bit carried away in your egos or like competing and you're like, who's going to do the best in the keiko? That's okay to some degree, depending on the level. And the point is that there's a bit more pressure, right? And then obviously you've got the shiai where it's like, don't lose and try to win. So that's like the maximum pressure. And then obviously the shinza is the pressure in a different way because you're being scrutinized. The point is you've got these different tiers of pressure that you put yourself under, pressure testing, okay, in different stages of your kendo training and in different parts. And they all have a purpose. And this one drill, Kirikaeshi, you're sort of seeing layers of progression of putting yourself under varying degrees or, increasing by, increments of pressure. So we started off with the very basic Kirikaeshi, not fast, just nice Kikken Tainoichi, everything together, big, nice shape, nice kamai, good control of distance. Then we varied that a bit by changing the target. So now we elaborate on the skill set, we play with the distances, so now you're getting a better understanding, a wider understanding of the distances involved, and the cross cooperation is a bit of that Iki connection stuff kicking in, a bit more of that. Then you've got the mixed Kirikaeshi, so now it's like, okay, now there was like fine-tuning that a little bit, right? So the differences are becoming more subtle and things like that in order to be able to execute it well. Then you've got the Aiki one, which is like they're cutting back, so there's another level of complication to deal with, and you're both kind of moving and trying to make valid yokomen strikes together. So the Aiki thing's lifted. There's a little lift in intensity, but you still got to do fundamentally good Kirikaeshi through all of that. Then you've got the Tai-atari one, which is like the strong focus on Tai Sabaki, okay? So it's more advanced in that sense, but you really want to, it's all just this real focus on driving your body forward, driving those hips through everything. And then when you do the Zanshin Kirikaeshi, there's this like high intensity, this attacking spirit, and Motodachi has to facilitate that. So they're going to be like, come, ba, 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 ba. Yeah, they really got to work with you. So it's no good like Kakari being all fired up, and Motodachi is like, okay, that brings us on to our final variation. And this, for me, is a really, really under-practiced variation of Kirikaeshi in general, I find. Less so, from what I've seen, less so in Japan. And probably less so in maybe one or two other territories, but I'm not familiar enough to say for sure. But definitely from what I've seen around our parts here in the UK, I would say it seems to have become something that was practiced more in the past and a little less these days. I'm seeing a lot less focus on Tai-atari in Kendo these days. And I'm not sure if some of that has to do with the new rules around Tsubetsurai and how long people spend in that, and maybe people are then placing less emphasis on how to enter the close distance and different variations on how to do that and how to deal with what could possibly happen. Okay, but Tai-atari is an important part of Kendo, and it's important to know how to deal with Tai-atari when it's done against you. There's lots of different drills you can do that in, but I think a good way to learn to deliver Tai-atari and receive Tai-atari comfortably without too much else to think about is within Kirikaeshi. Okay, so really it's the same as we've done before in all the other variations, but this time when you go Toma isoku ite namae, man, you're going to close the distance entirely. You're not hitting with your hands. What's happening is your shinai hits and it stays with the opponent, and your body comes forward until there's no space for this anymore. This naturally goes almost towards a Super Serie position, but you're not going to stop at Super Serie because that would be a bad habit, giving your opponent opportunities to counterattack you to make the hikiwaza. Okay, so if you just closed and you went to this distance, like tsuba to tsuba, but with a bit of play in it, they can easily make a hikiwaza opportunity from there. What you really want to do is cut with sutemi, take the attack the whole way on through and bring your hips, your body. This exercise is about taisabaki, about using your body to strike. So really bring your hips through, and what naturally happens is as you run out of space and your body catches up to your hands, this comes straight up and you're like here, right? But low down, not in front of your chest like this. Okay, this is a bad habit. If you're high with your hands in Tai-atari, the high level sensei will push your hands up and you may fall on your back, okay, because you're kind of top heavy. So you might have seen this kind of thing elsewhere on YouTube, videos of like tough kakari keiko or the tough keiko with the sensei, where people end up falling over. And a lot of times if you go ahead and watch those back, you'll see that they've cut, and when they've not realized that their attack has not succeeded, they're giving it all this, yeah, like this, and their hands are up really high, and the sensei's just used their taisabaki and a little bit of like tenuchi, a little like snap, and with this grip of the shinai, and that's enough for the person to sort of go cartwheeling over. So I think it's important to understand that when you close a distance, you should close not with your hands. This is a big mistake that people make. They cut and they kind of go like this, just hands first, no matter what. Instead, it should be, cut, and when the hands, it's clear that you're going to get stopped by the motodachi, you should bring your body in, and it's like the elbows, and then this comes, the grip comes back down to chudan. Okay, but it's important you don't cut, bring the hands back, and then close. This is incorrect. It's got to be cut, close a distance, body catches up to the sword, and then this comes down. And it's kind of like, like if you had the angle for the Tsubetsurai where the tip is going over their shoulder, just naturally in that position is fine. Not too wide out, not too straight. Okay, just let it naturally find that position. But basically your belly is going to be between your hands effectively. Okay, but it's right against your door. Don't force it, just relax and let your body come forward and do the talking. The sword is now useless. At the close distance, you can't swing it, you can't do anything. Just relax, okay? So you come forward and you bring your hips right into them. It's motodachi's problem from there on, okay? So on the receiving end of this, the motodachi should be prepared to absorb the shock. You don't want to get knocked back out of control, and you don't want to get knocked back off center, off kilter. So it's very important that you kind of receive that in. And there's something you can do as well. So if you're standing in your kamae, and this is your back leg, right, and this is your front leg. So this is your right foot and this is your left foot, and if you're in chudan. So say this is you heel to toe, and they're closing the distance. As they're about to arrive, you can bend this right knee slightly and just put that the back leg about half a foot back to widen your base slightly. As they make contact, you just want to do a little bit of a like that, just a bit in, okay? Just meet them on that impact, okay? And if you're basically receiving men, so you make the invitation for men, you just open like this. This is already on a nice natural angle. So as they come in, you also do the same thing as them. Your hands are in a chudan position, close to your door. So they're not going to hit your door like this. They're already kind of contacting your door. So as they crash in and you kind of meet them in this, you should get a nice natural clash. And you'll be in control to be able to naturally make your 3 steps back using the momentum generated, okay? Very important to get used to receiving it and understanding the kind of impact that's going to be generated, and to be able to, if you want to stay straight and on the center line, you need to be able to develop the skills to be able to do that. There are other drills where you learn to deal with it more tactically, like how to redirect them off in different directions and things like that, or how to stop them dead in their tracks. But just be realistic about Tai-atari. If you're 5'4" and your kakarite is 7 foot right tall, you're not going to stop them if they absolutely want to barrel you over, which brings me to my next point. Kakarite, the person doing the cutting, your objective is not to bowl the motodachi over. Your objective is to bring your hips through with sutemi, so commit to the attack and drive into the motodachi, right, with full commitment, not full aggression. There's a difference between those two things. Now, my objective is not to knock the guy through the wall. My objective is to effectively use my body to try to knock them back into the distance, the uchima, the cutting distance for my yokomen. Okay, that's kind of the thought, right? So it's like you do with your tenuchi, like a squeezing technique. It's kind of on-off. It's not crashing through. Yeah, you don't just go like this. You go yeah, not okay. So bear that in mind, okay? But this is a very useful variation. I don't recommend it for beginners, outright beginners, and definitely don't use it if people are not in armor against anyone, really. There's way too much that goes wrong. They're just not protected for this kind of thing, okay? So safety first. Don't do Tai-atari Kirikaeshi with beginners without armor, okay? But once people are accustomed to armor, they've got good control of their fumikomiyashi, then it's a valuable variation, okay? You don't have to do it often, but when you do it, focus on it and spend some time on it, and it will bear fruit. So that's it. Those are the variations of the Kirikaeshi I wanted to show you today. There may be more out there, but those are the ones that we fundamentally mostly practice in our dojo. So a couple of points just to summarize, and these are like if you break these are like the sins. Yeah, it's so to break these, that's the sins of Kirikaeshi. So try to keep an eye through all your Kirikaeshi. And I'm not saying you're not going to make sins. Everyone makes sins and mistakes, okay? We all get it wrong. But the point is to be aware that when you are getting it wrong, or you get the advice of, hey, you know, your hands are too low, or whatever it is, try not to be hurt by it. Just be aware it's happening and try to bear it in mind for your next practice or your next few practices. Just keep it in mind and train with it in mind, and you'll get the improvement. It's not that you train with the hopes of never making a mistake. That's not realistic. That's not what happens for people, okay? Even some of the higher level sensei will probably look back at their seminar videos that got recorded or something like that and be like, I wish that one didn't. The one thing I was demonstrating there didn't get filmed. There's there's all sorts of reasons why that happens in a seminar. I'm not trying to have a dig or anything like that. I'm just saying that like everyone has these moments where they're like not necessarily 100% focused on a certain aspect or something, and it might drop a bit. Okay, the point is that if you, like I said, if you get a coaching point from your sensei or your senpai, just try to obviously take it on board. Don't get offended, and then just work on it. That's the process. You just come back for Keiko and you just work on it. You work on it. There's always something to work on. So it's the same for me. I recorded this video. I did my best at the end of the Keiko, and my Motodachi stayed after Keiko to help me just grab the footage very quickly, and I did one after another. And then I played it back, and I was like, this is not all my best Kirikaeshi. There's some nice aspects where I'm like, oh, I'm doing that a bit nice, but there's some bits that I'm like, yeah, need to like police myself a bit. Okay, so we're going to go through these sins, okay? This is just off the top of my head, but some of this you will have heard before, but it's always worth talking about and reminding yourself about. It's very important that you try your best to carry this all through, okay? First thing is, start from Toma, the big men at the beginning, the middle, and the end. You must not come back to Isokui Tsunomai. This is pointless. It must come back to Toma. This seme in, and then the cut from there is super, 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 super important in Kirikaeshi. I cannot overstate it. Later on, so if you're an early dan grade, say you're Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, and you want to go to the Yondan, Godan thing, right? Something that becomes very important later is Tame. Tame is this ability to enter the distance and be ready, 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 ready to strike. Physically ready, mentally ready. The two need to be like singing as one by then, or you need to at least show that more often than not you have that. Especially for 5th dan, right? But they won't see usually signs of this need to already be evident for 4th dan. You can't develop that unless you're practicing this on a regular basis, right? And Kirikaeshi is one of the... You can do it in your standard waza practice, but Kirikaeshi, because the Motodachi knows the next attacks coming and they're going to open and anticipate, there's a certain flow to the drill that makes it really good at facilitating practicing this tame, okay? And tame is kind of useless without seme, okay? So you got to be able to put pressure. So the first thing is when you step in, like I said, everything's got to start from Toma to give you this opportunity to enter Isokui Tsunomai. Where, next one, right? When you enter Isokui Tsunomai, it's very common to do the Tsugiyashi, step, and then one foot overlaps the other. Try not to do that, okay? This much overlap is not such a big deal, like if it's like your big toe alongside your heel. Some schools of Kendo will teach that as optimum, okay? I'm not picking over that so much. What I mean is like halfway alongside. This is not a good habit. You're effectively standing on one spot. You're not balanced. You're basically in a slightly controlled fall. But you're no longer stepping. You're kind of falling forward at that point. That's not ideal, okay? But at the same time, don't leave your left leg behind. So stepping in, you've got to make hiketsuke to really bring it up. It needs to be underneath you for you to be able to develop tame. So that's the second point, okay? Avoid the tsugiyashi, but also do the good hiketsuke, bringing the back foot up. Third point I want you to try to work on. Now this is a little bit more advanced. For beginners, it's okay to absolutely go, yeah, step in, and then maybe stop, lift the sword, and then move forward and cut. That's okay for beginners. But I think once you have EQ, you should change that and really aim to consciously change that so that you don't actually stop. So your body, you step in and your feet stop for a second, but actually what happens is your hips are still slightly moving forward, and you use your knees a little bit, the bend in your knees to facilitate this. So like imagine just like rocking, a bit like I said with receiving the Tai-atari. Where you step in and your right knee is still continuing forward slightly, okay? So what happens is you seme instead of this dead stop with your kensen. You seme, but your kensen keeps moving forward, okay? Try to aim for that. It's at that point where you can no longer hold that the right foot then begins to move off. Now you're not moving your right foot, it's your left leg pushing your hips forward. That means your right foot starts moving forward. And it's only once the right foot is really set off, then this cut in the timing of 1, which brings me to my next point. The Kikentai Noichi point portion of this, which is make sure you cut in the timing of 1 for those big men. Yes, it's semen, right? Not 1, 2. Okay, so especially again for Dan levels, this is really important. For beginners, it's okay. Lift and then move forward and cut. That's not so bad. But for Ikku and above, I would say it's step forward, 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 forward. Cut in the timing of 1. Okay, bam, very important. And then for the Yoko men, the same theory applies because you cut the Yoko men. This stays there, and then it's pop, pop, pop. Right? Not Okay, so the rhythm is different. Not 1, 2, but 1. Okay. Super important. Cut the men, cut to target, right? 45 degrees. Yeah. And it's this bit here where you get like this. Usually people have their menhimo around here, right? Or sorry, here, right? Wrong angle. Yeah, and it's crossing their forehead. It's like still on the strong part of the bone. So they say around here where it starts to turn soft. So you're basically, the angle is this, right? Because you cut down to the chin. Some people teach to the eyes. What they mean is the monuchi, where that kind of where you perceive that to be. Okay, but the whole monuchi is like, especially on a shinai, it's like that long. And so depending on how you're judging it, like if you cut that down to the eyes, the bottom portion of the monuchi is like down to the chin. So it's a slight difference in interpretation and explanation. So some people will say down to the eyes, some people will say down to the chin. Both are correct. Okay, but the point is 45 degrees, but left hand in the center. Okay, so that's like my final point, is like the Yoko man, don't helicopter around your head like this. Yeah. This is incorrect. It's up, down, up, down, up, down. Okay? Very important. If you bear all of these points in mind, always with your Kirikaeshi, and like maybe the last one is just always, just every now and again, just catch yourself and go, am I really lifting up and opening my body? And that's maybe my last like bonus point on this, okay? But if you keep all of that kind of stuff in mind, and just now and again, just pinch yourself, bring yourself back to reality and humble yourself. You might have done a Kirikaeshi you were really happy with. Man, and loads of spirit, right? And you're like, yeah, I'm really fast now. I'm really tough with myself. Just check yourself. Maybe video yourself every now and then. Little reality check, because you'll probably find like me, like you're like, oh yeah, I was really fast, but really bad, you know. So just bear those in points in mind, and remember, Kirikaeshi is fundamentally a fundamentals drill. Okay, so yeah, although it can be modified, emphasis can be placed in different ways. So don't beat yourself up too hard when you get it wrong, like I said earlier. But at the end of the day, it's all still Kihon. And so it needs to be treated as Kihon, which is ultimately you have to try to do it correctly first. So the last point I wanted to mention on Kirikaeshi, and it's quite an important one, is correct breathing and correct use of the kakegoe, the shout. Okay, sometimes people will call this the ki-ai. It's important to know. So like in the standard kind of layout that we've talked about in terms of how many strikes you're going to do, the general way to breathe, or the in 3 breaths method that you should be practicing, it should be from Toma. You do your initial kakegoe, your yeah, hold that breath. So like you'd let out that initial shout is maybe, I don't know, 60%, 70% of the breath that you took in, right? But you keep the rest in reserve. You step into Isoku Itanomai, and have this building sense of pressure, 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 pressure. Man! Breathe in. Do all your yoko men, forwards and backwards, on the one breath, using about 70% of that breath that you just took. Then you cut that last yoko men, you come back to Toma, and you're still doing the shout, yeah? So, man, 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 Toma, isoku itenomai, man! Breathe again. Man, 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 Toma, isoku itenomai, man, Zanshin, turn. And that's where you finish. Another thing to mention as well is sometimes I hear like different versions of how people do the like how that, you know, when they say men, how they say men. So sometimes you hear when they do the yoko men, it's men, 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 men. This is incorrect. Okay, it's got to be one continuous shout, but it also shouldn't be man like this. That's not right either. You need to express kikentai no ichi. Okay, but you also need to control your breathing, control your kamae, and kind of have this tension in the lower abdomen, the hara that everyone talks about. So you need to emphasize each strike. So you need to say men for each strike, but it needs to be one continuous breath, right? So man, 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 man. Okay, this is super, super important. Don't let that fall away. If the Kirikaeshi has been modified so that it's like full length, then really you're doing as much of that on one breath as you can. Quick breath in through the nose between, yeah, so when you have to breathe in, yeah, no one's saying pass out, but you should push until you've pushed all your air out. Then quick sharp breath through the nose and continue on. But whatever you do, the final yoko men, the final, like, say 3 or 4 yoko men coming backwards, going to Toma, and then that next men going through, you really need to try to do that on one breath, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. It takes a bit of practice when you're doing the modified versions and their full length and all this kind of thing, but you'll get the hang of it. But stay in the habit of doing it. And then the last thing I would say is that final men going through, try not to do it as men like this, right? Try not to let it drop off, but it should be man, turn, and yeah. Although you'll probably be right out of breath at that point, but mentally try to keep your focus as high as possible. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Appreciate you stopping by. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure that you do subscribe, turn the notification bells on, and you'll know when I put out any new content. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Until next time, bye bye guys, take care.